Okay, then welcome everyone. We are about to start a conversation about how to make systems in portfolios physical and harnessing collective imagination through strategic design. And if you find it strange, the question, I can assure you that it's going to make sense in the coming hour. By the way, I'm Simone. I'm part of UNDP Strategic Innovation Unit. And I'm here to facilitate this question. And with me, I have Daniela also helping facilitate the questions that can come up in the chat. I think what we have in common among all of us in this call is that we are trying to find a better way to tackle complex development problems. And we possibly have questions in our minds on what strategies can we deploy to generate new possibilities and ways of understanding complex dynamics of the changing climate, energy transition, social justice. And also, how could we create relational architecture through developing lived experiences and shared spaces that would allow us to collaborate and affect change. So we have these questions in mind, and a few weeks ago, we reached out to two outstanding doers that are redefining how we can see and create possibilities through strategic design. So let me introduce our two guests. First, Kristin Alford. She's a futurist and the inaugural director of MOT, is an award-winning museum of discovery at the University of South Australia. And there she leads developing immersive experiences to showcase research and innovation and improve the capability of young adults to think about the future. And I think what brought us and caught our attention was she's, bridging the gap between researchers and people with lived experiences. Thank you so much for coming. And our second guest is Sam Rai, is developing and designing relational infrastructure and living labs at Monash University in Australia to address complex challenges such as climate change and thriving communities, with over 15 years of experience in participatory and strategic design. So welcome both. Thank you so much for joining. And now let me transition for the first question that I have. And it's based on, complex issues can be very difficult for people to grasp. So Kristin, can you share a little bit on how you have demystified a complex issue in one of your projects by using relatable everyday things? And what was the outcome? Over to you, please.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And Sam, if you are able to share that presentation and just click on that first slide for me, which says ethos. I just want to give you a little bit of background to what ethos is. So we're a future-focused museum of discovery. We connect young adults with emerging technologies and science. And what's becoming ever so clearer is that most of the future issues that we have are not really technology fix solution type issues. They are issues that require us to think about systems, to think about sustainability, to think about ethics, and to get better at asking those questions that incorporate a whole of system perspective. So one of the things that we run is this event called Ethos. The setup for Ethos is to bring together researchers and the general public to tackle ethical questions. And the idea is not necessarily to solve them, but to get better at questioning, so that when we are confronted with something that needs a solution, we have the skills ready to go. And so each event is based on discovering a common object together, doing an interactive activity around that object, listening to a very, very short expert panel, like 15 minutes maximum, and then having small group discussions around the object. So Simone, would you like me to talk about one of those examples? So Sam, if you can skip down to the next slide for me, what you'll see on the screen is one of our ethoses, which was looking at the ethics of plant-based milk. And so the way that we went around this was to use that object of plant-based milks like oat milks and almond milks, coconut milks, to start to think about the issues of changing food systems. And so the activity that we ran with people was if you imagine yourself perhaps in a very sort of gourmet food setting, sipping a glass of wine, and someone is taking you through the tastes and smells of the wine in a wine tasting kind of setting, or it could be a coffee tasting or anything like that. But we did a plant-based milk tasting, and so what we did was set out 5 different plant-based milks. And we had a sommelier lead us through a taste and a smell of those plant-based milks. And then we had a short panel session which featured somebody from a marketing research background, really focused on the branding, and someone from a nutrition background thinking about food systems. And then we opened it up for small conversations. And it was just really, really effective for a number of reasons. But the conversation that came out of that was really system level conversations about the ethics of changing food systems.
Awesome.
Did you want me to talk a little bit more about what are the things that came out, or how that went?
Yes. Could you elaborate a little bit more on this, and then we go through?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are a couple of things that came out from the tasting, particularly because we were doing something that was, I guess, creative and fun, and it wasn't what people expected. And so, first of all, that set up as being something that's a little bit unexpected and a little bit different, kind of piqued people's curiosity, and it opened them up to coming into something a little bit fresher, without preconceived ideas, because we'd surprised them with the activity. I think the second thing that happened was, it's also quite hard to take yourself seriously when you're sipping plant-based milk and trying to make comments about how great it is, and in doing that, we kind of lowered the hierarchy of who was in the room. So any of our experts were sort of sitting, and they were also participating in the activity. Sam, if you can just pop down to slide 6 for me, you'll see a woman holding a glass of milk and considering it. That is our Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research and Enterprise, so one of our very, very senior leaders. It's hard. It just breaks the hierarchy when you're all sitting in that space, all participating in the activity. And then if you just skip up to the slide above for me, Sam, that one, you can see that there was lots of laughter and lots of conversation, and that really started to build trust between participants. So, they hadn't met each other. They were sitting at long tables, as you would have seen. They brought friends, but they weren't having discussions with friends. They were having discussions across groups. From some of those slides, you will have noticed that the age range that we're getting at these types of events is really anywhere from 10 years old to 75 years old. And you're creating these relationships across sort of, generations, and across kind of social areas, as well as the interest areas and the disciplines that people come from. So that's the value of that interactive activity straight up. And it sounds really simple, just to take an everyday object and, have a bit of fun with it. But I think for me, the place and where it sticks, and I'm sorry to make you drive, Sam, but if you can go down a couple, you'll see a slide that has 5 questions for life, that one. When we actually started to get into the group discussions after the expert panel and after the activity, we were asking these people these questions, and just the breadth of discussion that emerged thinking about the ethics of plant-based milks was really interesting. I think, like, we covered a lot of ground. So it was anywhere from, what kind of milk might you order with your coffee? What kind of milk do you drink? Why do you drink it? What are the cultural reasons about why you might choose one milk over another? Through to thinking about the naming of nut milks as milks, and what that means for dairy farmers, and what that means for demand and impacts on traditional agriculture, through to disruptions in food chains, so the demand for coconut milk and what that's meant for Pacific Islander nations and disruption to their local food chain. So you can sort of just, even in those 3 examples, some very wide-ranging system-level conversations about the ethics of changing food systems. So it seems like quite a simple process, and it seems sort of counterintuitive to set up a really serious discussion around food systems with something kind of light and funny and unexpected. But actually, we found that the more that we can have that that light sort of interactive start, the more we build trust with participants, and the better and the deeper the conversations are at the end.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristin. I think, yeah, exactly how you said. Seems simple, but it's no obvious way. So now let me bridge, to some and some. How do I contributing to raising these critical questions in your work? And yeah, tell us a bit more, because I know that you are also using no obvious ways to foster these interactions between people. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Simone. Hello, everybody from around the world, and thank you, Kristin, for that. It was lovely to hear so many echoes of my own experience, my own practice in what you do, but through such different methods as well. So I guess I'm going to jump on to a couple of slides from my side, just to try and share a little visually as well. I mentioned I'm calling in from Wurundjeri country, which is sort of an hour and a half east of Melbourne, Australia. This is pretty much my backyard. This is the sort of the local river where I take a lot of inspiration from, and I'll talk to that a little bit more in the coming moments. I guess I wanted to jump back a little bit to explain maybe a little bit of where some of my practice has come from, and I guess the last 10 or 15 years or so of working in this strange systems change space and I guess as you were asking about how to surface those sort of non-obvious questions and responses from people. I guess this was the sort of chaos that of where my design practice began. I think the kind of co-design making, lots of post-it notes, very I describe this sugary design now. Like you kind of feel a little bit jittery when you've been in these workshops with so many colors and materials. So this is one of my very good friends, Chelsea, and we were working in youth mental health and well-being at the time, looking at how we could engage people, young people, older people across the system in reshaping the lives of young people. And I guess the lesson that I took out of this time was obviously about the methods of making and how we were able to surface different thoughts in people that sometimes they couldn't speak to. So the making helped them to name some of those, but where we really landed was actually the importance of that trust and connection up front. And so Chelsea and I talked about this as starting well. How do we start well, and how does that affect all of the conversations and the ability to collaborate that comes after? So that sense of preparing the ground and really creating that sense of connection was really important. And where my practice has then sort of led me is actually away from those the sort of the sticky notes and the man-made materials and the synthetics and the Lego and the serious making and the likes, and actually back to the natural world. A lot of so I've also had a career in environmental conservation, and really enjoy being in the natural world, and I began to wonder, well, what happens if we change the materials that we're designing with? Does that change the kinds of conversations that we have? Does it change the types of things that are made and how people think about them? And I found yes, essentially it does. So this was my first ever organic materials workshop, and it was really beautiful to see how people treated these materials. They were very frugal, they were very gentle, and they were very you know, they were very respectful of these materials, and the conversations that started to come up were a lot about interconnection and you know, the how I guess the materials were affecting how people were thinking, and so I'd ask them to essentially visualize or create something that talked to a community that they were part of at the time. And so on the left here, I can't remember the full story, but essentially these are the types of things that come out of these workshops. They don't look like anything in particular, but they all have a story behind them. They all have meaning, and I find this method really draws on a number of different practices, and I'm still learning about art therapy and how that factors into this ability to surface what people aren't too aware of. So the stories and the narratives that come with what is made are very impacting for the people who make them. You know, it helps them to understand themselves as well as other people. And I guess just to talk a little bit about where I'm taking this now with the work at Monash, we're starting to look at the use of living worlds as a way of describing net zero futures. And using that as using these little terrariums as a way of bringing together the organic materials and those synthetic materials, so that we start to bring together those stories. So maybe that's a little bit about myself right now and where we're coming from. But I think you know, if we change the materials, we change our language, and if we change our language, we change what's possible.
Thank you, Sam. It is lovely and super inspiring. And now, I mean, all of you have seen it, that both Kristin and Sam are using examples, tangible things in the physical space. And my question now goes back to Kristin again. What do you see as a benefit of doing that, you know, and not digital maybe thing or a PowerPoint, you know? Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, just that that sense that, well, bringing in all of those senses and that and the movement. So I'm really interested in the idea of embodied learning, for instance, and the way that we might move our bodies or move through space as we're doing things. So you can see with that activity, people were getting, you know, had a lead activity, but then they had to guess the types of milks, and people were leaning over and they were moving around to tables, and they were sort of, you know, having these discussions in quite a you know, an active way. And so it wasn't just silently kind of sitting and receiving information. They were getting up, they were moving around, they were really kind of having discussions around learning. But I think the other thing around that is it just does create a platform for building trust in a way that is a little bit different, you know, because you have to have you're having conversations, and those conversations aren't being, you know, they're not being in that first tasting bit, especially, they're not actually being recorded, you know, they're not being observed, they're not, you know, and you can just have a really kind of social conversation. It changes the quality of conversations that people are having. And when you're having those face-to-face conversations, you're also better able to pick up the side conversations that add to the depth of what you're talking. So if you're online like we are tonight, yes, we can have some conversations in the chat, but they are quite separate parallel streams. If you're sitting at a long table and you're discussing milks, or you're doing something and somebody else next to you is having a conversation about something, that just allows you to have these multiple kind of conversations that then start to build together and create a bigger conversation. So certainly the value of doing that in person, I think is really high. And I think there is also just something to that physicality of the interactivity. So doing something like, you know, in Sam's workshops, doing something with your hands and with materials, using those to have the conversation that you're having in some way, starting to have those social conversations that build trust. That to me is the real value of that first part of the exercise. And we've run other events which I guess are more traditional, where you might have an expert panel or, and it's more of a traditional learning style. And we don't get the depth of discussion, so I think there is something around that, that activity that really sets up trust and sets up, an active way of working and learning with each other that then carries through the rest of the event.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristin. And how about you, Sam? Because you've been doing that in the context of a university. What are you seeing as a benefit?
Yeah. I think probably very similarly. The organization, the university, so Monash University, for people who don't know us, it's one of Australia's largest universities. We've got a wide number. Actually, I've been there 7 or 8 months now, and I feel like I learn another department or another faculty every day that I didn't know that we had. And that adds another whole discipline or another whole body of work or set of projects that that people are doing at the university. And so what we're trying to do with the net zero work is bring together people from across the whole university. So our facilities team who look after the campus and decide what gets built where and what, to what sort of standard. We're trying to bring them together with transitions researchers who are studying, how do transitions happen in these in the climate space. And then we're trying to bring them together with, outside partners who don't have any context for the university. They're from council or they're from local businesses, because our project's about a broader precinct. And so when I think in universities, there's often this they're structured around faculties. So people are often spending lots of time with other people who think in a similar way or have similar methods. And so breaking people out of what they know and trying to find methods that cross-cut with different language, with different context, with different cultures, to come to a collaborative solution that nobody knew they were going to come up with when they entered that room or that workshop or whatever we're running. That's an art. As I think the plant-based milks is a great example, because it's a great leveler, right? We can all I think there's some genius in it, because you're anchoring off like wine tasting type experiences, but you're asking them to do it with something else. And so you're kind of keeping people in a bit of a safe zone, but asking them to do something that's a little bit different. But we all know how to drink milk, right? So, and we all know how to taste. So I think what we're trying to do is do something similar, where we're asking people all to meet in the middle and do something that doesn't come from any of their disciplines. It's, this sort of living world building. A lot of people are familiar with gardening or, making little things with their kids or whatever it might be. And so we're trying to hook into that idea to ask them to envisage a future, because envisaging future is actually quite a hard thing to do. It's quite hard to stand in 2040 and think back as to what your life would be like at that time. So we're asking people to do something hard, but through a medium that they're hopefully familiar with in some way.
Yeah, and if I can just add to what Sam was saying, I think that we were talking about sort of the physicality of things, but actually because those things are not really with anybody's domains, nobody is a plant-based milk tasting expert. Nobody is an expert at building canoes out of small bits of plant that they find on a desk in a workshop somewhere. We're asking them to that nobody has that kind of expert knowledge. And so it is that great leveler. So in the context of what we're trying to do with Ethos, we're trying to explore the ethics of emerging technologies and the research into emerging technologies for issues that actually as a society, we haven't decided what's right yet, because we haven't really encountered those things. And for researchers, they're right at the edge. They don't know what is the right thing to do because they haven't talked about it with the public. There isn't a public opinion about those things. And for the public, they haven't made up their mind because they don't know that those things are happening. And so for us, it's about this really nice kind of dance where we are bringing researchers to discuss some of their work with people from a whole range of backgrounds who then form feedback and give feedback on what they think is right. But those people are also getting more familiar with what is happening, and you're getting this really nice circle where you're doing exactly what you hope to do in some of those co-design things about really respecting and being able to incorporate people's different individual knowledges as being valuable to creating the whole picture. So there is something around that physicality because it's not an expert activity. You can't be good at it. You also can't get it right necessarily. That really does break down that hierarchy and allow people to bring their own knowledges to the discussion, which is exactly what I think Sam and I are both really looking for.
Yeah, Kristin, and can you elaborate a little bit more, because how you explain how you set up this space also helps on this power and people and power dynamics that happens. Could you just elaborate a bit more? You are muted.
Yes, for sure. I think one of the things that I said earlier is when I was showing some of those photos, you can see that you're not gathered in your friendship group. We have long tables that are set out. You're forced to sit with people or up against people that you have never met before. The expert panel that we have, as I said, is very, very short. Really, there's 3 questions, and those experts are not experts in the ethics of the topic either. So when we're looking at the plant-based milk example, I had a person who was an expert in marketing, but wasn't doing any research related to plant-based milks at all. She was just an expert in what branding was. We had another person who was a nutritionist who was doing some work around almonds, but not really in the realm of milk either, and certainly not in the ethics of milk. And so again, we're not asking those experts to come with a fixed idea about what the ethical question should be. We're asking them to say, from my perspective and the research I do, this is where my research kind of abuts against the issue, but we're also not asking them to be experts. And as I said, that panel is very, very, very short. It's really just meant to spark some further ideas for the discussion. And the panelists are sitting on the table doing the activity, like the person I showed earlier. Everybody is sitting doing the activity. They come out of the audience to talk. They go back into the audience for group discussions. And in that way, that setup really does level the hierarchy. I think the other interesting thing is that we do write up the summaries of the final discussion. So we're not recording everything that people say, especially in the interaction at the start. But when they go through the group discussions, we get them to report back. And so we might have, 15 people from the audience say a couple of words, and we'll collect those ideas. And the people who report back, you could have a professor at one part report back. We've had, 10-year-old kids report back. We've had international students reporting back. And so again, there's no expertise required to speak and to give those ideas a voice. And then we generally have one of our gallery staff do a write-up. And again, that gallery staff person is not an expert in the issue either. They're often an undergraduate student, never have had any relationship to the topics we've discussed at all. And it's really just a reflection then of what people are saying. So I think by kind of giving something unexpected at the start where nobody has expertise, making sure that everybody is in the activity and everybody is in the discussion, we're really able to reduce those hierarchies and allow people to interact. And the setting is really important, as you said, so it's deliberately designed so that people are sitting next to strangers. We have different topics each time we run them, and so not everybody, we're getting a different group every time. We have some hard, fast fans who love these events, but we do get a range of different people coming in all the time. So it just really allows us to have really rich discussions and over time start to build, as I said, both the capacity to do ethical thinking more naturally for both our researchers and the community, but also start to build out some of the understanding of the system level issues that we're thinking about, which may in themselves create more questions, which I think is also important.
Thank you, Kristin. And it's super inspiring for us, all of both your work and Sam's work, because at UNDP, as we talk, the first encounter that we had, we are transitioning to a way of working that is, we call it internally portfolio approach, that is all based on the system thinking theory, where we really are addressing complex issues. And for that, we need to raise these critical questions that sometimes are just not part of our daily way of working. And for that, we also need to engage with a diverse perspectives that sometimes have conflicting views. So I think the example, Sam, that you gave us of how you can break the silos maybe inside a university where people need to step out of their expertise or their department. And this is hard, So I think you are bringing us two examples of very different and creative ways of doing that. So it's super, super inspiring for us. I want to bridge now, because we're already receiving some questions that we can address. One of them was to talk a bit more about the people that are participating in these events, and if you had any, because you know that at UNDP we work a lot with the public sector, with government. If you had any of these participants joining some of these sessions, and how was the experience? And who wants to start, Kristin or Sam? Open.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. Our audiences are mixed, to be honest. So as I said, we've got quite a diverse age range. As I said, we have a lot of international staff and students. So we generally have a good kind of gender balance and cultural balance of people from different backgrounds attending the public events. And then we have people from very different backgrounds in terms of the research they might do or anything like that. I'm thinking of an event that we ran particularly, which was one where we had a different activity, and instead of looking at plant-based milks, we were looking at waste in healthcare, so sparked by the object of the COVID mask, and thinking about how we might deal with waste. And for that audience, we had a really nice range of people. So we had a large group of international students who had come from the business school with a business school background. We had a group of public participants, including one of our regulars who's into sort of carbon management and net zero policies, so coming kind of more from that waste sustainability angle. We had a group of people working in drug development, really focusing on waste in laboratories from the university, and we had a group who came down from the hospital. So for us in South Australia, that's government-based employees working in our largest public hospital, and so that to me was a really great example, because as I said, the purpose of our events isn't to solve problems, which is another way we get out of getting stuck in conflict, because what we're doing is surfacing all the issues in these conversations. We're not necessarily trying to decide on the best way forward. But out of that conversation, the conversation after we'd finished the event between the laboratory researchers and the hospital staff started to initiate some further discussion with a view to collaborating on seeing if they could reduce waste in the hospital. And so for me, that was an example where we did have people from from government, and did have people eager to try and then take some of these ideas and do something with them. So that would be an example of bringing in not just a researcher public audience, but also bringing in what we would think of as industry partners or government to the conversation as well. I mean, in that circumstance, they are self-selected. They've come because they're interested. But I think, Sam, your context is a bit different, where you're trying to also persuade people to have a really cross-sector conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. My brain was thinking about all the different projects that I could talk to from across the years, but I guess having been relatively active in the social labs space back in sort of 2010 through 2018, 2020 almost, that whole approach is predicated on bringing people from across the system. So our work at Lifehack, which was the youth mental health project, we were actively trying to convene from across the system. So we were, our favorite events were where we could have someone who was working in Treasury sitting next to a school teacher, sitting next to a social worker, sitting next to a young person who was designing, a new youth mental health intervention, and then, put them in front of, the minister for health or something, because I feel like I'm preaching to the converted in terms of complex problems and portfolios, but we know that actually you can't really be an expert in a complex problem. You can know a lot about some of the domain, but because of the interconnectivity and because of the dynamics, I would argue it's pretty much impossible to know the whole system and be the expert in the traditional sense of how we used to think about experts. So experts are particularly good in technical problems where you're trying to solve that, complicated kind of scenario. Whereas when you move into the complex space, actually context and working across that diversity is really important. And so, yeah, I could give examples of Grove social lab that I worked on in Chicago around gun violence, where it was similar, trying to bring together people from the neighborhood, artists, police, neighborhood watch, and gang members and all sorts of people. And I guess that's the context that I'm bringing to the net zero work at Monash as well. The workshops that we're doing, I think I mentioned with the living worlds, the little terrariums. We're convening from across government and local business and uni and researchers and educators and the likes. But we're also looking to, with that, very much aligns with the UNDP approach of we're looking to build a portfolio of experiments that will then be supported by a living lab onwards over the next couple of years. So I guess my context is quite often that sort of more problem solving or, immersing into that complex challenge in a quite direct way. Yeah, I guess I just really enjoy that mode. So I'm also fascinated by the mode of not having to be so on, and so, to be a bit more playful and to actually be able to think about some of these challenges without having to think about how you're going to intervene in them in the same way. I think there's real validity and use in both of those approaches.
Thank you, Sam. And I think I'm also want to use this opportunity to share that some of our country offices are already experimenting, trying to bring, certain artifacts, physically to spark this work that we are doing in a portfolio way of working. So I'm going to post in the chat some of these experiments that we are doing, which is very inspiring, and maybe some of you haven't seen it yet. But I also want to bridge to a question. Could you elaborate a bit more about the relational infrastructure? Because was what we talked before, and I think this is also very relevant for the context of UNDP.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we were talking offline before, I sort of explained that this notion of relational infrastructure for me was me trying to sort my own head out as I increasingly work with people from different contexts. My current boss is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Research Infrastructure, and so his day-to-day is about lab benches and microscopes and solar factories, and thinking big and thinking about the tangible tools and materials that are needed to enable research. But again, as I was talking about the living labs and that kind of work, I was trying to explain that it wasn't necessarily about setting up a new facility. What the living labs were doing was actually recombining the talents and the relationships and the imaginations and the research and the assets and the abilities of existing kind of constellations of people from within the university and outside of the university. And so I kind of hit on this term of relational infrastructure, and it seems to have sparked in a number of people. I've had a lot of conversations about relational infrastructure since, and I guess I'm not a big one for trying to get down to really tight definitions, because I feel like so often what I'm doing is actually trying to name things that can't really be pinned down. But I guess when I wrote the article, which I'll share in the chat afterwards, I was talking about the relationships, the collective intelligence, the imagination and the values that create that sort of that ability for us to work together, that trust, that ability to collaborate, that ability to solve really hard challenges. I guess another way to talk about it's almost like the collective muscle that we have to be able to enact change. And so that, that weaving in of lived experience and that weaving in of the common theme here of connection and trust, and that really is the space that I'm talking about when I'm talking about relational infrastructure. And so the implications of this for an organization is that, I think everybody in an organization knows that it's people to people that gets things done, right? It's not the policies, it's not the structures. Those are useful things, but when you lose someone from your team, you don't just feel it because they're not there doing that, that X amount of hours of particular productive work, right? You lose a member of your team, the creativity, the felt sense of being able to work between one another, the ability to collaborate. You can't just replace that with another 0.5 FTE, another full, another part-time employee. That takes time to build. And so that sense of culture and that sense of alignment, I think is how I think about relational infrastructure. And so I'm really interested in how you build that, because I think it's a really important thing, but I'm also really interested in what can you do with it once you have built it? What is possible in that constellation of people? And so I've been sort of trying to explain different types of relational infrastructure that I see, living labs being one of them. But there's, a number of, deep demonstrations, often the teams behind those. Obviously, the accelerator labs and the likes have that a similar approach to trying to build collective understanding and collective muscles and sense making, and that ability to learn together, I think, is a really, really important aspect of this relational infrastructure. And I'd love to keep exploring it with people, because I certainly don't feel like any kind of expert in it, but yeah, I'm interested in what other people see in that space.
Yeah, I was just having another look at your article while you were talking, Sam, because I have told so many people about relational infrastructure in the last 2 weeks, I swear. But I think some of the examples that you've talked about, come out of people working collaboratively on things. But I guess I also wanted to give assurance that some of that relational infrastructure comes out of the sorts of events we run, where you might get researchers in participating in the audience, or you might get them on a panel. They come because they're interested in a topic. They have a conversation there, and that sets off. As I gave you the example of the hospital one, it sets off a relationship that didn't exist, and we can see that we are weaving these interesting webs across our university, where it's not just the interaction with the public through the museum that's important, but it's also them meeting each other and realizing that even though they're not working on the same thing necessarily, they might be working on that same larger topic, or they might be thinking about things from two different perspectives. And that's been really just so lovely to watch those interactions come together. And I think when we're working in those complex systems in large organizations, we're always trying to find room for the water cooler conversations, but university campuses and international gatherings are not great for water coolers. And so finding those opportunities to bring people together to have these rich conversations where you are building trust, even if it's just like for us, even if it's just for an hour and a half and we're not expecting anything else, does have this kind of layering of relational infrastructure, which I think is really, really lovely. So yeah, thank you for that term. I'm very excited to watch that grow.
And regarding that term, we received multiple questions. We live in a times of polarization. So do you see this as a challenge on this type of work, or how it's the opposite, how this helps, to overcome polarization?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it does is expose both the opportunity and the risk, right? The polarization shows us how important it is that relational infrastructure is invested in, is nurtured, is we recognize the importance of it, and we actively work to strengthen it, because otherwise you get polarization. So I'm certainly not going to be claiming the role of relationships as some kind of silver bullet that's gonna just suddenly make polarization and the likes go away. However, bringing people back into relationship with one another to discuss those polarizations, we know from countless examples around the world, probably one of the best ones for me is some of the work that was done post-apartheid in South Africa of truth and reconciliation, and the ability for those stories to be heard and for those people to come into relationship with one another again, despite what happened. I'm certainly not claiming that it's now a perfect solution there, but I think that that sense of bringing people back into relationship is really important for that question.
Yeah, and I'd add that there's something else around. We talked about kind of that lightness of starting with an object that is a little bit playful, and yeah, I think there is something around, because we're starting in that kind of framework. it's harder to hold on fast to an ideological position when you're doing something that's a little bit more playful. It's hard to take yourself seriously. You know, there's a lot of laughter at the beginning of our sessions because we're doing something that feels a bit silly. And, you know, I think if we started diving straight into the politics of changing food systems, we'd get a lot of polarized discussion. But because we're coming at it from something that's playful, and we're allowing people to kind of relax and to not take themselves too seriously, we then kind of get them to, there is a process of moving into an activity like that where you kind of have to suspend the seriousness of being you, right? Because you're coming into play with something and you have to kind of suspend all of those voices of sort of judgment and criticism about looking silly and all of those things, because I mean, you're swirling a glass of milk, you look ridiculous. But there is something about doing that I think helps people suspend judgment and be less quick to kind of dive in with the opinion. Things gradually come up a little bit more in the discussion, and people are more willing to hold complexity and hold opposing comments because you're in a playful mind. And I keep getting reminded of a futures researcher, Jim Data at the University of Hawaii, who when asked sort of around, you know, how do you do futures thinking well? And I think for me, we're trying to do ethical thinking well, which is a question about what we should do in the future. Jim Data said that for an idea about the future to be useful, first it should appear to be ridiculous. You know, like if you want actually good thinking about a complex, stuck system, there's no point being too serious about it because you'll just keep talking about the same things over and over again and you're not going to shift it. And so for us, that sense of play is actually a really important way of moving towards those seemingly ridiculous conversations and seemingly ridiculous ideas. And I keep settling on the fact at the moment that the more serious the issue, the more playful the conversation has to be, because we're not going to solve the big issues if we're coming in serious, kind of trying to determine all of the facts. We also need this kind of playful edge to really find the, you know, the flexibility in the system and to be able to play around with that. And I think that makes for better thinking. It definitely makes for better conversations. And I think that in itself helps reduce some of the polarization. Like we've never had a discussion around conflict in any of the events that we've run around ethics of emerging technology. And we've discussed some really kind of hot sort of issues, but it's because people are feeling like they can raise crazy ideas, or they can raise comments, or they can go, oh, I haven't thought about, what if we thought about this? And it's not, the space allows for that kind of playful banter of ideas to emerge, which I think is really lovely.
Hey, thank you, Kristin. Unfortunately, we are almost at the end, but before we close, I want to take the time to answer one question from Bas, you know, which I think is also very relevant for all of us here. You know, if you have never used tangible artifacts to support conversation, sense making, where to start? Maybe first Sam and then Kristin.
I'm going to be biased. I'm going to say start with moss. It's the great leveler. They're tiny little worlds, you know, like no one can resist a little clump of moss and telling a story, you know, whether that's adding things to it or telling a story about what happens in it to imagine a different world. So yeah, for me, anywhere in the natural world is a great place to start, but particularly moss. And actually the link that I dropped in about the organic materials workshops that I've done in the past has a whole kind of run sheet of how I used to run these workshops, including like down to all of the little kind of things that I would collect to bring them along. So if you want to just take something and use it, please feel free to use that little workshop that I posted in there.
Yeah, and for us, it's around getting people. It's mostly focused on getting people to use their hands. You know, so we can give them something to hold, and that's nice. But actually, what we prefer to do is give them something that they have to make or they have to interact with. And we also, the way that we tend to do things is also give them something that they can go home with. I mean, we didn't give people plant-based milk to go home with, but you know, the event we ran the other night looked at using the resources of the moon and whether we should mine the moon. And everyone went home with a Play-Doh lunar, a photo of their Play-Doh lunar landscape, to again prompt other questions. So for us, it's really about thinking, is there something that people can make and give form to that represents ideas for them, or that starts the conversation? And then there something that they also might be able to take away that allows those other conversations to keep flowing. That's keeping in mind that our purpose is to develop a community that's getting better at ethical questioning. You know, so having something to take away is a way of making sure that keeps happening in the community, and having something to do with your hands and to express something in conversation is a way of building trust. So for us, it's about making sure that we're also meeting the objectives, but those would be the things that we do. People love Play-Doh, they love forming things, they love making things. And so anything that you can give form to, I think, is a really nice sort of place to start.
Thank you so much. I mean, I have the hard task of trying to summarize in key takeaways this wide range of creative thoughts and ideas we had today. But I think what I'm taking with me is that we talk a lot about new forms of engagement and new ways of looking at challenges that need, you know, there are complex challenges. We talk also about how to build trust through social conversations and playful actions, and suspend the part of being seriousness, of being you. And lastly, also the part that start with simple things and look for what is around you or nature, as Sam was sharing with us. So it was really, really inspiring. Thank you so much for joining us. For all of you that also came to this conversation, you can find the recording and more information in the link that Daniela just put in the chat. And yeah, thank you. And I hope all of you have a wonderful day. And yeah, that's it from today.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
everyone. Thanks for all the questions. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you all too.
Thank you, Kristin. Thank you, Sam.